watching and listening to your home for Greater West Bloomfield News, Civic Center TV and 89.3 WBLD Orchard Lake, West Bloomfield, Kego Harbor, Sylvan Lake, 89.3 Lakes FM. It's the Megacast, an hour-long TV and radio streaming show keeping you informed on the day-to-day news. Live from West Bloomfield, we're bringing you the news, updates, and information impacting communities around Michigan. Join our host, Tyler Kieft, as he talks with community members, business leaders, and professional experts about the stories that impact you. You're watching the Megacast on Civic Center TV. Stop by West Bloomfield Town Hall June 14th and get your health in check at the 14th Annual Greater West Bloomfield Health and Wellness Fair. Over 40 businesses, organizations, and vendors take the time to showcase healthy practices, tips, and resources for the community. Young or old, there's something for everyone and everybody. 11 a.m. to 2 p.m. Wednesday, June 14th, the 14th Annual Greater West Bloomfield Health and Wellness Fair. This community update from Civic Center TV and 89.3 Lakes FM.
There are many different kinds of noses. Our noses can sniff out all kinds of things. Good things and bad things. Your nose knows if those sniffles are just a cold, allergies, or COVID-19. So swab it. Test it. It's good to know.
When the temperatures are chilly, being together warms the soul. Keep the winter fun going. Help protect yourself and those around you by keeping your COVID-19 vaccines up to date.
I'm Steve Eiserman of the Detroit Red Wings, and I think every child in Michigan deserves a safe, healthy, and happy childhood. Can we build a state where Children Trust Michigan isn't just a name, but something our kids believe? Please support Children Trust Michigan as the voice for children and families by visiting the website to learn more.
You're listening to your radio homes for the Megacast, 89.3 WBLD Orchard Lake and 88.1 WBFH Bloomfield Hills. Today's edition of the Megacast begins now. Welcome to the Megacast, our live daily TV, radio, and streaming show talking about all things Michigan. I'm Tyler Kieft. Today we'll be talking to a number of people about topics of interest and importance to Michiganders just like you. Let's begin with what's making headlines on our local news page on civiccentertv.com. Our top story comes from Teresa Baldas at the Detroit Free Press. This week, the Michigan Court of Appeals unveiled new details in the Oxford High School shooter case while explaining a decision to put his parents, James and Jennifer Crumbly, on trial for involuntary manslaughter in the deaths of 4 students who lost their lives on that horrific day in November of 2021. The main point of contention in the 17-page opinion released from the court this week was the ease of access that the then 15-year-old shooter had to the firearm that was used in the massacre. Prosecutors made the argument that he had exceptionally easy access to the weapon, while his parents denied that and said that the gun was locked and stored securely. According to the court's newly released information, investigators who had searched the Crumbly home on the day of the shooting after executing a search warrant had located the case for the weapon used in the mass shooting event next to a box of 9mm ammunition, as well as a locked gun safe in the dresser of James and Jennifer Crumbly's bedroom. The combination for that lock, 000. In addition, the reports showed the safe also had 2 additional weapons as well as gun locks. Those gun locks had not so much as been taken out of the original packing, nor had the original packaging ever been opened. In addition, searching the shooter's bedroom, the detectives found shooting targets, shell casings, knives, and a notebook with drawings such as guns, as well as a small animal fecal matter on top of the teen's nightstand. We know that the shooter was called to the office for a meeting with the administrators and his parents earlier in the day on November 30th of 2021 at Oxford High School. But the Free Press in this article also reported that Jennifer Crumbly had texted her son at 12:21 p.m. on that day saying, quote, "You know you can talk to us and we won't judge," end closed quote. Her son swiftly replied saying, quote, "IK," meaning I know, "thank you. I'm sorry for that. I love you," end closed quote. About 10 minutes later, he opened fire on his school community, killing 4 of his peers and putting several others in the hospital. Both the shooter and his parents are in custody in the Oakland County Jail at this time. The shooter has pled guilty on several charges and is awaiting further hearings to decide whether or not the severity of those charges is appropriate for him, given the fact that he is a minor and will be tried and is potentially going to be tried as an adult. And his parents will now stand trial as well, an unprecedented case in school shootings in our country where a parent of a school shooter or parents of a school shooter will be held accountable for the actions of their kids and at the very least face trial for involuntary manslaughter in the deaths of 4 students at Oxford High School just a little bit over a year and a half, just under a year and a half ago in November of 2021. Also making headlines today from Bridge, Michigan's Lauren Gibbons. If you remember the pandemic, then you'll remember businesses such as restaurants certainly had to take some serious measures in order to boost their business while they were shut down or had to limit the amount of people they could have inside of their business at any one given time. One of the things that they did was carry out beverages, particularly those adult beverages. Now, the temporary pandemic measure that was enacted by the state's Congress to allow for carry-out drinks may soon become permanent in the state of Michigan, at least under legislation that passed through the state Senate earlier on this week. The alcoholic beverages could be sold takeout style and therefore be sealed and packaged in containers similar to how you purchased a bottle of beer, liquor, or wine at the grocery store or your local liquor store, but in this case for mixed drinks at the local bar and grill. On Wednesday, legislation to make this measure stand post-pandemic in Michigan passed on a 37-1 vote. Good news for restaurateurs across the state, some of whom built new business models or continued their business model and saw it have a nice little boost after the thick of the pandemic while selling drinks for carryout. Said one Clarkston business owner, quoted in this article from quoted in this article from Bridge, Michigan, quote, "It's been a huge lifeline for us, keeping people employed, keeping us moving forward." And you know, it was also quoted in this State Senator Mallory McMorrow, a Democrat from here in Oakland County, had said something along the lines of you know, innovation over the course of the pandemic had helped to bring this to light as something that was a step that could be taken at the state level to help these businesses even after the pandemic. You saw how it worked. You saw how it worked safely, despite the concerns that were in place at the time, given that it was really the first time that this had been happening here in the state of Michigan. But it worked out well for these business owners. It worked out well for these restaurants and these bars that were very much hit hard by the COVID-19 pandemic and you know, were fully shut down for in-person dining for the bulk of the COVID-19 pandemic and had to take extraordinary measures to keep their business alive. And in many cases, they weren't able to do so. And so having a measure like this in place after the pandemic, it's something that consumers were very apt to engage in through the thick of the COVID-19 crisis. And now it's something that could potentially become permanently allowed here, permanently permitted here in the state of Michigan. And as we heard from in this article from a business owner in Clarkston, and as I'm sure we would hear from a number of other businesses that have been doing this throughout the pandemic, it's something that worked. It's something that added to the lines of revenue that they could bring in for their businesses, and especially right now, given the state of our economy with inflation, with them trying to keep employees on their payroll and increase that employee pay where it's being negotiated as employers are seeking better pay and better wages from the current employers to stick around. This is something that could add to that for these small businesses that, you know, money is always going to be tight for the small businesses, at least as they're getting started. And in this case, it's another option for them to continue to make some money even when times are tough or when times aren't tough here in Michigan. So really great article here. A lot of information that supports a lot of supporting information in this article that can give you some context and some background information and some other critical info that will help you better understand how this came to be and why now this is being put in place potentially, or has passed through the Senate. Now, a similar piece of legislation did go through the Senate in 2022, however, ultimately didn't end up being signed into law. This may be a different case this time around, as it passed on a 37-1 affirmative vote in the Senate, nearly unanimously approved by Michigan's Senate this year. And so we'll see if that does eventually make its way into law. And if it does, we'll get talking to local businesses in this industry to see just how much of a boost that could be to them going forward, even though we're out of the woods for the most part with the COVID-19 pandemic, although COVID-19 still going around in our communities and still something that you should be keeping an eye out for right here in Oakland County. Finally, making headlines today on CivicCenterTV.com's local news page from Matt Charbonneau at the Detroit News. In New York City last night, it was unfortunately not victory for MSU, as the Spartan men's basketball team was defeated in overtime by number 3 seeded Kansas State in an absolute classic at the Mecca of basketball, Madison Square Garden. A back-and-forth game, the Spartans were often electric on the offensive end of the floor, and on the defensive side, sometimes leaving a little bit to be desired. However, going back to that offense, the shooting of A.J. Hogard and Joey Buckets himself, Joey Hauser, who finished the game with 18 points and 6 rebounds, certainly kept the Michigan State Spartans basketball team in the game at Madison Square Garden. A very close game that ended up in overtime, 98-96. So 98-93 was the final score in that matchup between the Michigan State Spartans, who came in as a 7th seed, and the Kansas State Wildcats, who came in as the number 3 seed in the region last night. A game that went to overtime. Excellent performances from both teams across the board. Efficient shooting, stout defense for the most part, and it really came down to who was doing the little things better at those critical points in the game. But the star of the show wasn't Joey Hauser, wasn't A.J. Hogard, or even Jaden Akins and other players on Michigan State who had great performances in that ball game. It was a player in white and purple, as Kansas State guard Marquise Noel had one of the most prolific tournament performances in NCAA history, dropping 20 points and dishing a tournament record of 19 assists to down the Spartans, all while playing the second half on an injured ankle. And what a way to go out for the Michigan State Spartans. If you're going to lose in a heartbreaker like that, the consolation is it is an instant classic. One of the best games we've seen in the NCAA tournament in a number of years. Definitely the most interesting game we've seen, the most compelling, close game in this year's tournament. And it's never easy to lose. It's never a happy night when you lose, especially when you're this close to that finish line. If the Spartans were able to get through this game with a win, they would be in the Elite Eight playing against Florida Atlantic, a 9 seed that they would have matched up very well against. And it's very likely that the Spartans could have made their way into the Final Four despite their struggles throughout this entire season. And one more thing goes their way and you end up out of the way of a team like Alabama, who's a 1 seed in a different region. Now all of a sudden you have the Spartans having a chance potentially at making it to the championship game in Houston, but that's obviously not the case in this situation. Kansas State defeating the Spartans 98-93 in overtime last night at Madison Square Garden. And just looking at this from a team-by-team comparison, and in this article there's a link to the box score. And I encourage you to look at that, because no matter if you're looking at the Kansas State stats or the Michigan State stats or the team stats, especially as I'm looking at on my computer screen just below me here, it really was that close of a matchup. 98-93 was the final score. The Spartans shot almost 56% from the field to Kansas State's 49.2%. The three-point shooting was incredible from both of these teams. The Spartans were lighting it up from beyond the arc. They found their shot again last night that they didn't have in the round of 32 against Marquette, where they really struggled from beyond the arc, and it was their defense that kept them in that game, and some clutch play from leaders like Tyson Walker and A.J. Hogard and Mady Sissoko that kept them in that ball game. In this ball game, their shooting kept them around, and their defense, to some extent, kept them around, although Kansas State was absolutely unbelievable on both sides of the floor, also shooting over 50% from the field to the Spartans' 45.8%. The real difference maker there, earlier on I had flipped things around. Kansas State shot nearly 56% from the field. Michigan State, 49.2%. Kansas State, 45% from three, to Michigan State's 52% from three. This has been a Michigan State team that has been prolific from beyond the arc all season long. It's really been what has kept them in games offensively. If they have a really good game on the offensive side of the ball, it's tough for any team to defeat them, and it really did. It took a classic performance from Kansas State, particularly from Marquise Noel, their guard, an undersized guy who was able to just make incredible passes the entire game. I think about late in that ball game when he's talking things over with his head coach on the sideline, and then all of a sudden sees out of his peripheral, I would guess, Keontae Johnson dashing toward the basket and throws him an alley-oop in what was an absolute crazy play that some have put out on social media. Was that planned? Was that something that they had planned to do, to distract Michigan State's defense by having Noel and the coach go through a conversation and then just throwing the ball up? But no, there's no way. Look at that play. If you look at that play, there's too much that had to go perfectly correct in order for that to work. There's no way that could have been something that was planned out, and especially strategically at that point in the game, that would be a very risky call. So, I mean, that's going to be for Kansas State to divulge whether or not that was, in fact, something they planned out late in that game. That was a designed play. It didn't seem like it was at that time. Michigan State out-rebounded Kansas State very nearly, 29-27 rebounds, 20 of those 29 being defensive rebounds, 9 of those on the offensive side. Also very close to the numbers from Kansas State. Same thing with the assist numbers, relatively close, although Kansas State 8 more assists in the game than Michigan State, but that's to be expected when you have a point guard who sets a record 19 assists in this ball game. Really what it came down to was that incredible play from Marquise Noel, 20 points, 19 assists. He also had 5 steals and only 2 personal fouls in that game. It was so good that I'm even getting a text message affirming that it was that good because I didn't mute my phone like a dingus before this segment today. But look at this performance from Marquise Noel, one of the best performances in NCAA basketball tournament history, and it makes you think about this team and their potential to win a national championship. I mean, as a Michigan State alum, as someone who is a rabid Michigan State sports fan, seeing Kansas State defeat my team like that makes me root for them going forward. I hope Kansas State wins the title. They would be a great championship team. I think they have excellent stories on that team, from Marquise Noel and the performance he just had and the performances he has had in the last several games. And Keontae Johnson, a guy who a year ago we didn't know would ever be able to watch a basketball game again, let alone play at a high level after he had a cardiac incident while playing basketball at the University of Florida. He had collapsed on the floor of a basketball game in one of the most horrifying scenes you'll ever see in a basketball game, not knowing if a player is going to make it out of the stadium alive. And a little bit over a year later, he comes out there last night and has a very underrated performance. It's not often you score 22 points, you grab 6 rebounds, you also have an assist, you only have 2 fouls, you play out of your mind, you make some of the most wild plays at the hoop you'll ever see in an NCAA tournament game, and you're not the headlining player from your team in that performance. That's how good Keontae Johnson and Marquise Noel together were for Kansas State. For Michigan State, look, you can't complain when you got 5 players in double figures. You got almost their entire starting lineup. Malik Hall off the bench scoring 13 points. Lowest scoring starter was Mady Sissoko, who had only played 16 minutes total in the game otherwise, because the Spartans were trying to play so athletically and keep up with the undersized team in Kansas State that was shooting the lights out. But it's those little things. It's the ways that Kansas State's able to navigate around screens and get guys open. The fact that they would shoot the ball from anywhere on the floor and absolutely nailed a shot every single time. I mean, they would put up shot after shot after shot from way downtown, and I would look at it the second they released and say, that's going in. And then it would swish. It would be perfect. Marquise Noel, we talked about him too. There's a really interesting play where he's getting tripped up near the end of the play. He's right around the three-point line. The shot clock is expiring. He off balance just kind of throws the ball up and it goes off the backboard and in. I mean, when that's happening, it's something you hear all the time in basketball. When the other team, when you're doing everything right and the other team is still scoring the ball, there's really nothing you can do but keep fighting and keep at it. And that's what Michigan State did. So you can't be mad about that performance last night. You can be disappointed that the season ended the way it did because you look to the future and you look at what could have been, and there's so much promise there for Michigan State. There would have been so much promise for Michigan State, and potential is probably a better word to use than promise because nothing is guaranteed in the month of March. But the way that team was playing, they hit their stride at the right time. It's classic Tom Izzo team basketball, and with the recruiting class that they have coming in, nothing but excitement going forward and things to look forward to for the Michigan State Spartans basketball team. As for Kansas State, they will go up against Florida Atlantic University in the Elite Eight in the NCAA tournament with a chance of their own to go to the Final Four, as the Big Ten now out of the tournament entirely. Michigan State, the last team standing in this year's tournament from the Big Ten Conference. All of these headlines, including this one about the Michigan State game and the box score, are on our website, civiccentertv.com, on our local news page with links to COVID-19 updates and other public health updates from the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, the Michigan Department of Health and Human Services, and the Oakland County Health Division. We have a great show ahead on this edition of the Megacast. Stay tuned. Coming up next, what's going on in the markets and the economy. Dr. Michael Greiner from Oakland University joins us to discuss this and more next on the Megacast.
Let's savor these moments, made possible by the COVID-19 vaccine. Keep the dining out going by keeping yourself protected and your COVID-19 vaccines up to date.
My Michigan TV is streaming everywhere on Apple TV, Roku, Fire TV, and more smart TV apps. My Michigan TV is on your phone too. Take us with you wherever you go. Just search for My Michigan TV on your favorite app store or visit mymitv.com. All Michigan, streaming everywhere. My Michigan TV.
Hello, nose. My nose knows is when somebody uses the bathroom. Mom, Polly didn't flush. Ooh, I smell cookies.
I smell an A+. How could my nose be running when it stays on my face?
Our noses know if those sniffles are just a cold, allergies, or COVID-19. So swab it. Test it. It's good to know.
Let's relish these moments, made possible by the COVID-19 vaccine. Keep the festivals going by keeping yourself protected and your COVID-19 vaccines up to date.
Welcome back to the Megacast, our live daily TV, radio, and streaming show talking about all things Michigan. I'm Tyler Kieft. You can learn more about our program and keep up to date with us on our website on civiccentertv.com by going to our Megacast page, civiccentertv.com/Megacast, where you'll find links to every one of our partnering stations across the Great Lakes State, including right here in Oakland County, a number of different community television and radio stations, and find all of our full shows and each individual interview segment on demand. So whether you're able to join us each and every day during the week from 10 a.m. to 11 for our live shows, or you want to watch all the Megacast content for the week as you wrap up your week and go into your weekend, it's all there on civiccentertv.com facebook.com/megacast. Joining us now, as he does each and every week, to talk about the latest in the markets and the economy is Dr. Michael Greiner, an assistant professor of management at Oakland University's School of Business Administration. Michael, thanks for being with us today.
It's great to be back, Tyler. I'm talking to you today from the Windy City, Chicago, Illinois. So great to be here.
Right here in the Midwest, keeping it in the Midwest, but on the road today with us in the Megacast. The Chicago and Oakland County Megacast is the program on this edition of our Market Talk with Michael Greiner. Let's begin, as we always seem to do, with the Fed and with the interest rates. As this week, the Fed has yet to announce its interest rate, but is scheduled to happen very soon. In fact, it's scheduled to happen today. So, Michael, what should be expected here? Because lately it's kind of been an ebb and a flow where their raising of the interest rates were relatively low in comparison to some of the more historic consistent raising of the interest rates by almost a full percentage point. What should we expect this time around, given where we're currently at?
Yeah, well, we actually did just hear, so we're really on the cutting edge of the news here. And basically what rates have increased by is a 0.25%. So that's about the midpoint of what we've been seeing the last few months. You know, it's not as high as we've seen some months. I mean, you may recall we saw 4 rate increases of 0.75 of a percentage point increase, which was really historic in the amount that they were increasing it. And they were just trying to get rates up at a very rapid pace then. Then they seemed to be slowing things down. There was a 0.5 percentage point increase. There was a 0.25 percentage point increase. And there was some sense that, oh, maybe things are finally slowing down. Then we got some strong economic data. You know, you may recall that we talked before about the fact that the jobs market is simply going gangbusters still. In fact, January was a historic month in its report. So we're just seeing a very, very active economy. And the way that you deal with inflation is by basically slowing down the economy a little bit. So the fact that it's been going so strongly has been making many, including the Fed chairman, Jerome Powell, seem to indicate that, oh, you know, it's probably likely that we're going to be seeing a 0.5 percentage point increase or more, and that we're going to see a kind of a speeding up of these interest rate increases. Well, there's an old saying that the Fed increases interest rates until something breaks. And in the last couple of weeks, as you know, we talked about it last week, something broke, and that is the banks. And basically, we saw 2 mid-sized banks, but still pretty major banks, fail. To give you an idea, the Silicon Valley Bank, one of them, has assets in excess of $209 billion. That's with a B. So we're not talking a small community bank here. We're talking a major bank. I think it's the 16th largest bank in the country. And then we also had the second largest or the third largest bank failure in history, being Signature Bank, also another good size, medium-sized bank. And there are other banks that are kind of right on the edge. There's, for example, PacWest Bank and First Republic, who basically are struggling and have been trying to keep their heads above water. Now, the concern is that as the Fed has increased interest rates so quickly, what they basically do then is make the assets that the banks have, things like the loan money that they loan out or bonds that they buy, things like that, they make them worth less money. And so as a result of that, suddenly they don't have enough money to protect the depositors, to make sure they have enough money on hand to be able to pay back the depositors when they want to come into the bank and get their money. So that's what prompts a run on the bank. It's exactly what we saw with Signature. It's exactly what we saw with Silicon Valley Bank, and what we've been trying to avoid with PacWest and with First Republic right now. So that's the concern that the Fed has been dealing with, is that I saw it characterized as that they're between a rock and a hard place right now, where on the one side, you've got inflation still pushing and kind of continuing to push up the inflation, while at the same time, you've also got the banking industry, which, because of these rapid rate increases, are suddenly finding themselves in kind of a tough situation where some pretty good-sized banks are finding themselves not really able to handle these big rate increases. So the irony, though, is that part of the frustration that the Fed has had, and in fact, Jay Powell, the Fed chair, has talked about this, is that because of the fact that there's still so much money washing around in our economy, that people want to invest somewhere, that in fact, even though the Fed has been increasing interest rates. At the same time, you saw mortgage rates go up, and then they start to go down again. And there's a sense that, well, how are we supposed to slow down inflation when there's still all this investment money out there looking to be lent out, and people are willing to lend out money at lower interest rates than we might like to see if our goal is to slow down the economy. And so the irony is that with these bank failures right now, that actually what that's probably going to do is result in finally some slowing down of the lending. And that's really, frankly, what the Fed wants to see, because you have to remember, it's not like the Fed has some magic machine that just sets the interest rates for the country. It's not like they just suddenly say, oh, this is going to be the interest rate, and that's how it happens. The interest rates for the country are set in a market. Where you've got certain borrowers, you've got certain lenders, and basically what they're doing is competing over a certain amount of money, and it follows the same supply and demand curve that we've seen so many times from Econ 101, where the more money you have, the less value it has, and the value that we place on money is its interest. So the fact that that now there's going to be this sense that, oh, we don't want to lend out so much. It's going to make the money that does get lent out more valuable. And it's going to drive up the interest rates that people are seeing on the markets even more. And there have been estimates from the low end, which Jay Powell said, of that this might be the equivalent of about a 0.25 percentage rate increase, just the banking crisis. And I've seen other estimates that have said that it might be as much as 1.5 increase in interest rates. So my guess is it's probably somewhere in between there, maybe 0.75 percentage point to 1 percentage point. But the point is that doesn't matter. The point is that it's going to hopefully start to really slow down the economy and enable us to finally get inflation under control.
So going back to the bank issue, because we know Silicon Valley Bank was mostly venture capital and big-time investors that were those that were impacted by that failure and by those issues. But these other issues that are being had with banks at this time, from what you were explaining, it kind of sounds like that could be a good thing for combating inflation. So given that the banks are having a little bit of a problem right now, or a bit of a mess, what does that ultimately mean for where we're at in this economy and trying to limit the impact of inflation or reduce the impact of inflation? Because if banks are struggling, that's obviously going to be a concern for regular people out in the economy, for consumers. But if it's helping the economy reduce inflation, potentially it's a benefit.
Yeah, that's a great question. And, it reminds me of a saying that Warren Buffett always has, that as the water goes out, you get to see all the people who are bathing naked. And what he's referring to there is the fact that as you start to get into some financial trouble, you start to see where there might be some banks, for example, that are not particularly well managed. And we saw this in Switzerland recently, where, for example, Credit Suisse for a long time has been under the gun because there's been this sense that it's a poorly managed bank, especially in contrast to its big competitor in Switzerland, UBS. Well, suddenly, because of the economic challenges right now, Credit Suisse finally essentially imploded. And the Swiss government stepped in and said, okay, here's what's going to happen. There's going to be this forced marriage between UBS and Credit Suisse, and UBS is basically going to absorb Credit Suisse. So, what you're seeing, I think, a lot of is kind of some of these weaker players being exposed for what they are and being cleaned out. Now, the irony is of this whole situation that Silicon Valley Bank, for example, despite their name, you would think that they engage in all these risky investments and that type of thing. But actually, they've been very conservative in their investments. In fact, some might say even too conservative, which may seem a crazy thing to say for a bank. But that's the problem, is that the interest rate that they were getting on their investments was incredibly low. So say if you're lending out money or getting bonds at, say, a 2% interest rate, well, that's profitable if interest rates are at 0 or close to 0. However, suddenly when interest rates are at 5% or thereabouts, suddenly you're losing money on those. And the bank has to go to run around and try to essentially make up the difference. And that's where, for example, Silicon Valley Bank got into trouble. And similarly, you see the same thing with Signature Bank and some of these other banks. But I think you're right. I mean, and this is really actually something that Jerome Powell pointed to very directly, which is that finally we might be seeing something that will finally give us some relief on this inflation issue. Because it's really been very frustrating, I think, for policymakers that inflation just has continued. Every time we think that we're starting to make some progress on it, suddenly we get more of these figures that show that this economy just is not slowing down. Now, you might say, oh, that's a great thing, because it means people are working, people are getting wage increases. That's all good. And the reality is that if the economy slows down a bit, there probably are going to be some more layoffs. We've seen some layoffs, for example, in the tech sector. But in the global scheme of things, that's still a very small amount of layoffs relative to the entire economy, and not enough really to impact the numbers. But we might start to see an increase a little bit in the unemployment rate. But that would be the type of thing that will finally start to slow down the economy, where we see interest rates start to slow down. And like anything else, though, there are two sides to every coin. Because on the one hand, you don't want to see people losing their jobs. That's a tragedy. And actually, there's been some research shown that people take their job losses as a much greater loss and hardship than inflation. But the problem is that inflation right now is being broadly felt by everybody. You go to the grocery store, you see inflation on a weekly basis every time you go there. And so people are very frustrated with it. And there's this real sense among policymakers that we've got to get that under control. That's got to be the priority. And they're hoping, I think, that finally, with this kind of balancing of maybe slowing down the interest rate increases, starting to see some pulling back on the lending from the banks, that we're finally going to see the slowing down of the economic activity that will allow us to get control of inflation.
In addition to all this, we're joined by Michael Greiner, Assistant Professor of Management at Oakland University's School of Business Administration. On today's edition of the Megacast, you can always join us each and every Friday for our weekly market and economy talk right here on the program, as well as find all of our segments on demand on civiccentertv.com/megacast. This also impacts the housing market too, and we've seen over the course of the last several years that it's kind of gone back and forth between being a buyer's market and a seller's market, given the issues with the banks that also, I would presume, impact the housing market as well. We saw this month, home prices fell for the first time since the Great Recession 11 years ago. That's some pretty big news. What's going on in the housing market? What led to this scenario?
Yeah, and that's a great question. And really what this points to, this is the clearest example that we can see of where the Fed's interest rate increase regime has really had its impact. Because the problem is that people think, oh, interest rates are going to be increased. Well, that's going to affect all lending. It's going to impact our credit cards. It's going to impact, say, business borrowing. But the reality is, for most businesses, they tend to borrow on a short-term basis. Usually want to pay back in a couple of years. And also, they are generally engaging in this borrowing because they've got certain investments that they need to make in their business that's going to help the business grow. So they're generally going to engage in most of that borrowing anyway. With cars, yes, it does have a slight impact. But as with credit cards, you have to remember, they're not borrowing that much money. So the interest rate, say, for example, on a credit card, the impact on that has been estimated to be, say, between $25 and $50 a month for the average consumer. Well, that's not really going to impact people's spending. But what is going to impact their spending is their mortgage payment. And that's one place that the interest rate increases have a big impact, because unlike borrowing, say, a couple $1,000s on a credit card or maybe $10,000 on a car, when you're borrowing, say, a couple $100,000 on a home, suddenly you're talking a big impact on the payment from these interest rate increases. So that's where we're seeing the interest rate increases having a big impact. And part of the problem that the Fed has is that the interest rate increases have been characterized as a blunt instrument. And I've also heard somebody call it that the Fed, it's like they're trying to control the economy. It's like somebody trying to control a kite, where you have limited control over how the kite is flying. And so, for example, right now, what we're seeing with the real estate market, because of the fact that people will enter into, say, leases over a year-long period, or that they will enter into purchase agreements where you'll agree to purchase the home and then won't close on it then for potentially even a couple months later, you don't see the actual statistics coming out of what's going on right now for several months. So the Fed is kind of, trying to estimate what's going on. And so what we're seeing now, actually, in terms of the slowdown in the real estate market, is likely a slowdown in the real estate market that dates back to as far back as December. So to say that this is just the start of it is probably an understatement. It's probably slowed down quite a bit since then. And I think that you could venture to say that part of the reason, at least, that you've actually seen over the last couple of months the mortgage rates go down a little bit is actually that the rate of purchasing of new homes has probably been slowing for a while anyway. So I think that this is where we're starting to see the real slowdown of the economy as a result of the interest rate increases, and it flows throughout the whole economy, because you can imagine, if you're not selling new homes, then you're not paying for people who are going to be doing roofing, who are going to be putting in windows, who are going to be doing other kinds of construction. You're not going to be having this money flowing through the economy to realtors and mortgage brokers and that type of thing. So it has an effect that then kind of flows through the rest of the economy over time. And interestingly enough, I was just reading this morning an article in the Wall Street Journal that pointed out that it's not just residential housing that's been impacted by the interest rate increases, but also by the banking failures. As it turns out, commercial real estate relies very, very heavily on these regional banks, the size of Silicon Valley Bank, Signature Bank, First Republic, that type of bank, who are the banks that have really been hurt in this recent crisis. And it's likely, again, that they're going to start slowing down on their lending, which then will flow into commercial real estate. And as we know, we've already seen slowdowns in commercial real estate, because unlike the housing market, which kind of bounced back very quickly as a result of the COVID recession, with people not going into the cities so much to work on their jobs and more working from home, what that's resulted in is a slowdown in the commercial real estate market. So there's a sense that market is actually going to slow down even faster than the residential one.
And we've seen before, Michael, that different issues in different parts of the economy, combining with different issues in other areas too, can combine to create that perfect storm and lead into something like a recession, which has been that big, scary word that's been, over our shoulders for the last year or so as we've been dealing with the inflation crisis here in the United States. And given where we're at with the banks, given what we're seeing currently in the housing market, knowing where we're at with the impact of inflation on prices at the grocery store and at the gas pump and so on and so forth, looking at that from a projections standpoint, from an economist's standpoint, what is that mode of concern, a level of concern right now amongst economists who are looking at the economy and seeing these factors? Are they worried as much as they were more recently, or as they were maybe even a year ago, that we're heading toward a recession? Or are these just kind of circumstances that are relating to each other and trying to work themselves out and find that basis of where they're at?
Yeah, that's a great question. That's really the $64,000 question for economists right now, because of the fact that, economists have really had a pretty bad record of predicting what's going to happen over the past couple of years. We're in new territory now. A lot of the models that we had looking back on the past really don't work anymore, because COVID changed things. There's no doubt about it. And we're living in a different world now, and it's kind of hard to understand how these different effects are going to happen. People initially were predicting that inflation was going to be transitory. Well, it wasn't exactly transitory. So that was one way that economists got proved wrong. Then economists were predicting, we're going to go into a recession. But then we keep getting month after month after month these blockbuster employment figures, which seem to indicate that the economy is not slowing down. And we even had a couple of subsequent quarters of negative growth of gross domestic product, which is kind of the back of the envelope calculation that many people have used to define a recession. But by the same token, during that period, we still had employment doing very well. So to say that we were in a recession probably is a misnomer. Probably the best way to define a recession has to do with the level of unemployment, because that's really what seems to impact things. And the balancing acts that the Fed is constantly trying to manage is this balancing act between having low inflation while also having low unemployment. And the reality is, you need a little bit of inflation, you need a little bit of unemployment to make things work. but you don't want too much of either one of them. So it's a constant balancing act that they have to go through. And the Fed chair, in making his announcement about this interest rate, he kind of gave an indication where he's seeing things going, and he's saying that he wouldn't be surprised to see the unemployment rate go up to about 4.25% to 4.5%. Now, that sounds like a big increase compared to where we're at right now at 3.5%. But on a historic basis, that's still pretty good, actually. And frankly, if we could deal with inflation without going above, say, a 4.5% unemployment rate, then I think that would be considered a success on the part of the Fed and on the part of the policymakers, and really would be perceived as a soft landing, that thing that they're always trying to accomplish, where we don't go into a severe recession with, say, 5-6% unemployment rate where people are really feeling it, and instead maybe just go through enough of a slowdown that we're able to get inflation under control, and we get back to that sweet spot that the Fed would like to see us at.
Always more to learn about what's going on in our markets and our economy each Friday with Michael Greiner right here on the Megacast. Michael, thank you as always for joining us.
It's great being here. Thanks a lot. Have a great week.
You as well. Michael Greiner, Assistant Professor of Management at Oakland University's School of Business Administration. You can always keep up to date on information and programs through Oakland University by visiting oakland.edu. We'll take a break on the Megacast. On the other side, we'll speak to one of over 330 and counting Share Detroit charities and nonprofits on their platform. Stay tuned. You're watching and listening to the Megacast.
There are many different kinds of noses. Our noses can sniff out all kinds of things. Good things and bad things. Your nose knows if those sniffles are just a cold, allergies, or COVID-19. So swab it. Test it. It's good to know.
Can I ask you a question? Why do you want to get the COVID-19 vaccine?
I don't like getting sick.
The virus will die.
It will be easy to not catch it.
Keep my family safe and keep playing soccer.
Because I love being vaccinated.
What's your hope for everyone?
I hope everybody gets the vaccine.
To keep safe and strong.
Be like happy, having fun everywhere.
Everyone stay safe and hope you get the vaccine.
Welcome back to the Megacast, our live daily TV, radio, and streaming show talking about all things Oakland County and the state of Michigan. I'm Tyler Kieft. You can keep up to date with us and join us for our on-demand programming on our website, civiccentertv.com/Megacast, where you'll also find links to programs and stations all throughout your local area from our partnering stations here in Oakland County and statewide from our co-flagship at My Michigan TV. Joining us now on the Megacast is one of over 300 charities and nonprofits supported on the Share Detroit platform. Katelyn Abell is one of the co-executive directors of the Stronger Warrior Foundation and joins us now on the Megacast. Katelyn, thanks for being with us today.
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, glad to have you on to talk to you about this organization doing great work in our local area. Tell us a little bit about the background of the Stronger Warrior Foundation and some of the things that you do to help people right here in our local area.
Yeah, so our mission at the Stronger Warrior Foundation is to help active and retired military members, and we do this with two different programs. We have our Mission Resupply program, which is targeted at sending care packages overseas to deployed soldiers. And then we also have our Adaptive Warrior program, which will go in and do house modifications for disabled vets through that program.
And so go into more detail about some of these programs and how these veterans are able to get access to these programs and those active duty military members too and their families, because these are highly impactful for them as they're coming back into civilian life by choice or by circumstance, and certainly for their families too, who are heavily impacted when a member of their family is either overseas on deployment or certainly as they're coming back into civilian life.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's kind of why we founded the organization. So my brother Brian Abell and myself founded the organization in 2019. He is actually active in the military. He's deployed right now over in Syria. So seeing firsthand what the soldiers go through overseas and kind of being secluded away from their families, that's really why we put together the Mission Resupply program, because that will help, kind of help those people out there, making them feel like they're not alone when they're overseas, because a complete stranger can decorate a crate and write letters and send a video and package it for them. And it's really a great keepsake for the soldiers overseas to get. And then obviously, we wanted to also help veterans who have been overseas and served. And, if they get injured, where our adaptive warrior program comes in is they get injured when they're not in service, the VA won't give them as much funding. So that's where we'll come in with our grants up to $6,000 to help do those house modifications that they might need done.
StrongerWarriorFoundation.org is their website. You can also find them on sharedetroit.org by searching in their Find a Nonprofit section for Stronger Warrior Foundation. And you mentioned your brother, the co-executive director, Brian Abell, who is currently deployed, you said, in Syria. Knowing the way, him having this experience as being active duty military, and knowing the impact that some of these different programs can have on the military, from your conversations with your brother and from others that are serving our nation at this time around the world, just how much of a difference does this make in their morale, but also just their ability to be motivated day by day, knowing that people back home are really giving them this support as they're fighting for our country?
Yeah, that's one of the reasons why we want to do it, because it is making a huge difference in their lives. We've actually received feedback. We'll get pictures sometimes from the soldiers that get their crates. I actually can show an example of one of the crates. This is the first ever crate that was created. So you can kind of see it's very personalized. It's an individual crate, and a little girl and little boy actually decorated this crate. Here's kind of a picture of them, and they can put the picture, and they wrote a letter as well. And then we'll package it with different kind of toiletry items. Obviously wipes are kind of a huge thing over there. And then we put a really cool workout shirt in there as well, and different food and toiletry items. So, not only is it a bunch of items that they get that they can use over there, but they like this because they know that a complete stranger took the time to decorate it and to kind of personalize it for them. So they'll keep this, and it will always be a keepsake for them. They'll put kind of their own storage units in here. So they love the crates. We've gotten messages telling us, thank you, this really made a difference for me and put a smile on my face. And at the end of the day, that's really what we're trying to do, because I know firsthand from my brother being gone how hard it is, for us, but for him as well. So, if we can kind of bring a smile to their faces and make them kind of feel a little bit more of home with them, that's what we're really trying to do.
And it's no secret either, Katelyn, that when those that are in the military come back home, especially if they're coming back home due to injury and their life has been forever changed, that those supports are not always there in place, or not always effective enough from the U.S. government, from the military branches themselves. And so these supports from our communities are vital in many cases for these soldiers, for these veterans to come back home and live with as high of quality of life as they deserve after serving our country. So how do you help to facilitate this? What sort of community support and support from other organizations goes into particularly those home modifications that often are the difference between a soldier being able to come back and live comfortably in their own home, or really struggling to get back to normal life?
Yeah, absolutely. So we actually collect applications through our website. You had mentioned it earlier at the StrongerWarriorFoundation.org. So we're always looking for, we kind of reach out to VAs and different organizations to look for applicants. We encourage anyone that is a U.S. veteran to submit an application if they need help or they need a house modification or repair. We go through the applications and we, last year we did 6 home modifications, and every year we look to do more. We've actually partnered with the Habitat for Humanity here in Michigan. So if they have a project and they have a candidate that's a veteran and they need kind of funds, we'll partner together and make a difference for that veteran together. So that's kind of a big partner of ours right now as well. But we're always looking for candidates and we're trying to raise awareness. And, you would think it would be easy to find candidates, but sometimes it is challenging. So sometimes we actually have to actively look for candidates. We've done a couple of partnerships with the Detroit Pistons and the Detroit Lions. They've both sponsored a house modification, which was great. And they actually helped us connect with the candidate for those projects. So always looking to raise more awareness and trying to help as many people as we can. That's, our mission, and that's what we really want to do.
And there's so many different ways, too, that individuals can participate, whether they're making a crate themselves or sponsoring a crate kit. Or other ways for people to get involved. Another way that people can participate is through Operation McVicker. Can you tell us about that ongoing project and how people can participate?
Yeah, so we put Operation McVicker together. So that is actually our first ever adaptive warrior candidate. His name was Katelyn McVicker, and we went in and we did a whole remodel for his bathroom. He actually is paralyzed from the neck down, and so he cannot, take a normal shower, bath. So we went in and repaired and put ramps in order for him to do this daily. And so he was our first ever candidate, and we do that fundraiser through him. So part of the proceeds will go through kind of different modifications if he needs more home modifications, and then we put the rest of the funds to our Adaptive Warrior program. And this is a fundraiser so for runners. I know a lot of people like to run, but it's basically a virtual run that we do usually in the fall. So we'll probably do it again in 2023 in the fall. And, we put it out there so anyone in the US can participate, and it's just based off of, running. So they can kind of say, I want to do 10 miles this month. And then they set a goal and then they share it with friends and family and try to fundraise and advertise for us. We did it. It's been a huge success. The first year we did it, we raised over $5,000, which was huge and great because, like I said, the funds went towards putting an additional ramp into Katelyn McVicker's home. And then also it goes towards other adaptive warrior projects we can do in the future. So yeah, look for more information on that. It will probably be coming in the fall. If anyone is an active runner, I know it's a huge hobby and people love to do that. So not only can they do their hobby, but they can also, help raise funds for a great cause as well.
More information can be found on StrongerWarriorFoundation.org or by visiting Share of Detroit's website, sharedetroit.org. We can learn more about the Stronger Warrior Foundation as well as over 330 other charities and nonprofits across the Metro Detroit area. Joining us on the program is Katelyn Abell, co-executive director of the Stronger Warrior Foundation on today's Megacast. Katelyn, about another minute or so left before we'll need to wrap things up today. And I want to end by asking, for those that aren't in military families or have people that they know and they're constantly communicating with that have served our country, what do you and your brother and others in these sorts of capacities wish that the general public knew more about the life of an active duty military member and their family and the support that they really need from communities like this?
Yeah, I think that the more awareness we can raise about our military families and kind of what they go through, that's what we're looking to do with our 2 programs. We're always trying to get people involved in our mission resupply program, whether you have a school class or you're a corporate business, anyone can get involved and really make a difference in the lives of our soldiers that are deployed. I think it's great. We've done a lot of events with schools, and it's great to kind of impact our young students and community members and really make them feel involved and like they're giving back to the community at such a young age. But then, even our older community and our adults, they love getting involved as well. So there's something with our programs for everyone, whether you're young, whether you're older, whether you have different hobbies, you just want to do a crate and get creative. You don't have to be a military family or have someone in the military to feel like you're making a difference. Everyone just loves to give back. And I think that that's really what we try to do with our 2 programs is give back and get the community involved to help give back as well. I really I really stress being, so involved in the military. I think it's great. There's so many other organizations as well that support the military, and, we'll sometimes partner with them as well. But I think our community really loves the military and they love to give back as well. So I appreciate all the support from all of our, we have so many great sponsors and so many great volunteers, and it means the world to me. And I know it means the world to my brother and all of our soldiers and veterans that are out there, for the community to come together and give back to them.
More information, StrongerWarriorFoundation.org. Katelyn, thanks so much for joining us.
Yes, thank you so much for having me.
I appreciate having you